The first thing I noticed was the way she poured coffee. Not the coffee itself. The pot was old, chipped at the lip, same as every other pot in every other cookhouse between Laramie and the Rio Grande. It wasn't the coffee. It was the angle of her wrist when she tilted it. The way her left arm stayed low and close to her side, the elbow tucked in, and the right hand did all the work. Like she was protecting something. Like the left side of her had gone quiet and didn't want to be disturbed. I was sitting at the far end of the table, hat in front of me, trail dust still in my collar. I'd ridden in that morning from the Granger spread, 3 days of nothing but short grass and my own thinking, and Walt Coburn's cookhouse was the first roof I'd been under since Tuesday. Walt's wife, Dottie, usually ran the noon meal, but Dottie was in Cheyenne visiting her sister, and the woman pouring coffee was somebody I hadn't seen before. She was maybe 30. Dark hair pinned up but not carefully, some of it had come loose and hung at the side of her neck. She moved through the room the way a woman moves when she's learned to take up as little space as possible. Not timid exactly. More like she'd practiced being small. She refilled 3 cups before she got to mine, and by the time she reached me she still hadn't looked anybody full in the face. I held out my cup. She poured. Her left sleeve was buttoned to the wrist despite the heat. I said thank you. She nodded without looking up and moved on. I didn't think about it again until that evening. My name is Cal Briggs. I want to say that plainly because the rest of this, the parts that matter, they all run through who I was when this started, and who I was isn't a simple thing to say. I was 44 years old. I've been working ranches in Wyoming and Colorado since I was 17. Never owned one. Got close once, had a half stake in a small place near Rawlins with a man named Orville Teague, a good man, who died of a chest infection in the winter of 1881, and whose widow sold the stake out from under me inside of a month. I don't blame her. She had 3 children and no income, and I wasn't family. But it set me back to being a hired hand, and I never got the footing again. I wasn't a famous man. I wasn't a feared man. I was a careful man, good with horses, better with cattle than most, could fix almost anything made of wood or iron, didn't drink enough to be a problem, didn't talk enough to be a nuisance. The kind of man ranch owners were glad to have and never thought about twice. I'd been that man for so long I'd mostly stopped expecting anything different. My wife Helen had died 4 years prior, fever. It took her in 11 days fast and total, and I won't go into that except to say that after her there was a long time, years, when I did my work and slept and ate, and that was the whole of it. Not grief exactly, not anymore. Just the absence of the thing that made it all matter. You can get used to almost anything. I'd gotten used to that. So that's what I was when I rode into Walt Coburn's place that September. A careful, quiet, unremarkable man with no particular future and a very orderly past. Walt Coburn had hired me for the fall roundup. 6 weeks of work, good pay by the season's standards, bunkhouse bed, 3 meals. I'd done it twice before, knew the land and the cattle, and Walt trusted me enough to give me the second rider's position, which meant I answered only to his foreman, a man named Hitch Paulson who I'd known since the Laramie days. The woman's name, I found out from one of the younger hands at supper, was Nora Pell. She was the wife of a man named Edmund Pell, who worked for Walt as a sort of general fix-it, fencing, carpentry, whatever needed doing on the structures. They'd arrived in the spring, come up from somewhere in Nebraska. They lived in a small cabin at the far end of the property, near the woodlot. She help with cooking regular? I asked. The young hand, a kid named Garrett, shrugged. When Dottie's gone, she doesn't talk much. I let it go. It wasn't my business. I had a roundup to work. But that sleeve stayed in my head. I'd seen things like that before. On the trail, in bunkhouses, in towns along the way. A woman who moves like she's protecting an injury that isn't visible. A stillness around certain men. The way a room can change temperature when one person walks in. I knew what I'd seen. I just didn't know yet what I was going to do about it. The honest answer at that point was probably nothing. I was a hired hand with no standing here. Edmund Pell was a fellow worker on this property, which meant Walt Coburn would have a view on anything that touched him, and Walt was a practical man who liked things quiet. I had no proof of anything. I had a sleeve and a tilted wrist, and the particular way a woman pours coffee when she doesn't want anyone to look at her too long. I went to bed that night in the bunkhouse and stared at the dark ceiling and told myself it was none of my concern. I believed that for about 4 days. The roundup pushed us north the first week, up into the higher pasture where the cattle had been drifting since August. Long days, cold mornings, good hard work. I didn't see Nora Pell again until the following Thursday, when I came back to the main yard to pick up a replaced cinch ring from the tack shed. She was at the woodpile splitting kindling. That struck me as wrong immediately, not because it was a woman's doing it. Women on working ranches did all manner of physical labor, but because of the mechanics of it. Splitting kindling requires two-handed work. Axe raised, both arms, the swing. She was managing it with her right arm leading and the left barely contributing, absorbing the shock of the split with her right wrist and hip instead of distributing it naturally. Her face was set like she was working through something she decided not to let stop her. I got off my horse. I didn't plan to. My feet just found the ground. "I can finish that," I said. She looked at me. First full look she'd given me, I think. Her eyes were gray level, not afraid exactly, more like she was measuring something. How much trouble this would be. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," I said. "I'll finish it anyway." There was a pause. She was deciding something. Then she stepped back and handed me the axe without a word. I split the rest of the wood. It took maybe 15 minutes. She stood nearby and stacked what I split, still favoring the left arm. I didn't say anything about that. I didn't say anything at all. When it was done, she gathered an armload of kindling and turned toward the house. "Thank you," she said, not warmly, not coldly, just plainly like a fact. "Yes, ma'am," I said. I got back on my horse and went to the tack shed. But I sat there for a moment with my hand on the pommel and the cinch ring I'd come to get sitting right there in my palm, and I thought, left arm, and I thought, the sleeve. I asked Hitch Paulson about Edmund Pell that evening. Hitch had been at the Coburn spread since the previous year, so he'd have known the man longer than I had. We were sitting outside the bunkhouse after supper, cooling down in the last of the September light. Hitch was a lean, weather-beaten man of about 50 who'd grown up in Texas and never quite lost the sound of it. "Pell," he said, and was quiet for a moment. "Handy, does the work he's told. Walt likes him because he's quiet and he doesn't cost much. Gets along with the hands well enough. Keeps to himself mostly, drinks some, not trouble generally." Another pause. "Why?" "Just getting the lay of the place," I said. Hitch looked at me sideways. He was a perceptive man when he chose to be. But he didn't push it, and I didn't add to it, and we sat there until the mosquitoes drove us inside. What Hitch hadn't said, and what I was turning over, was the word generally. Not trouble, generally. That's a word that does a quiet amount of work in a short sentence. The following Tuesday, I came back to the main yard at midday because one of the horses had thrown a shoe on the north pasture and I needed the farrier. The farrier, an old Swede named Lindqvist, was at the forge, and I had to wait. I was standing by the water trough when I heard voices from the direction of the small cabin at the end of the yard. I wasn't trying to hear. I want to be clear about that. The yard was open and the wind was wrong, and voices carry on open ground. Edmund Pell's voice, low and steady, the way that's worse than loud, and then nothing from her, or not words, just the particular silence of a person who's learned not to answer back. Then a door closing, hard. I stood by the trough and didn't move. Lindqvist's hammer rang on iron. A horse shifted in the corral. The sky overhead was very blue and very wide, and I stood there with the reins in my hand and something coming to a point inside me that had been gathering for a week. When the farrier was done with the shoe, I rode back to the north pasture. I worked the rest of the day. I was careful and thorough, and I did everything right, and I thought about almost nothing except the sound of that door. There's a thing I should explain about the kind of man I was. I'm not a violent man by nature. I've been in fights. You don't work the frontier for 27 years without that, but I never went looking for them, and I don't carry a gun except for snakes and the occasional necessity. What I am, what I've always been, is a man who sees things clearly and then decides what to do about them, and then does it without a great deal of noise. Helen used to say I was the most determined, quiet man she'd ever known. She meant it kindly, I think. She meant I was like a river, looked still from a distance, but had a current underneath that didn't stop. I'd been telling myself this wasn't my business. I'd been telling myself I didn't know what I thought I knew. I'd been telling myself that a man steps carefully in another man's household, that I had no standing, that Walt Coburn ran this place and it wasn't mine to disrupt. All of that was true, and none of it changed what I was going to do. The opportunity came in its own time, the way things do when you stop forcing them. About 10 days into my stay, Walt Coburn called all the hands in for a Saturday afternoon, some sort of supply meeting for the second half of the roundup, going over the cattle count, deciding which pastures to work next. Edmund Pell was there too, which I noted. He was a compact man, maybe 5'10", dark mustache, the kind of face that was easy to forget. He sat at the far end of the table and didn't say much and looked satisfied with himself in that particular way some men do when they're the only ones who know a secret. After the meeting, most of the men drifted toward the bunkhouse or the corral. Walt stayed in his office. Pell headed back toward his cabin. I went to the cookhouse. Nora Pell was there, cleaning up from the midday meal. She had her back to me when I came in. When she heard my boots, she went still for just a fraction of a second, barely anything, before she turned. When she saw it was me, something in her face settled slightly, not relaxed. More like downgraded from one level of caution to a lesser one. "Can I help you with something?" she said. I took off my hat. "I just wanted to check on your arm," I said, "the left one." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at the window, not to look out of it, just somewhere that wasn't me. "It's fine," she said. "Can I see it?" The silence that followed was the longest of the conversation. I stood and waited. I didn't push. I'd learned a long time ago that pushing doesn't work with people who have learned to endure pressure, they just harden. I waited like a man with nowhere to be. Slowly, she reached up with her right hand and unbuttoned the left cuff. She turned back the sleeve to the elbow. I looked. Then I looked away at the window, the way she had, because I needed somewhere to put what I was feeling. Above the wrist, up along the forearm, 3 distinct marks, old yellow-green, mostly healed. Below the elbow, newer, darker, maybe 5 days old, the shape that comes from fingers gripping hard. I breathed once slowly. "All right," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected. She pulled the sleeve down and rebuttoned it. Her hands were steady. Mine were not entirely. "You're not going to go do something," she said. It wasn't a question exactly. More like she was telling me not to. More like she'd had this conversation before with the ending already written. "Not today," I said, and I meant it. I wasn't going to walk out of that kitchen and do something hot-headed and stupid that would make her situation worse before it could get better. "Not any day," she said. Her voice was flat. She stopped. "I know," I said. We stood there. The fire in the stove ticked. "Who knows about this?" I asked, "besides me?" "No one," she said, "and I'd like to keep it that way." "Walt Coburn." She shook her head just barely. "Hitch Paulson." "Same." "Your family?" "Nebraska," she said, like that was an answer, and it was. I nodded. I put my hat back on. I stood there another moment looking at a woman who had learned to carry a weight that wasn't hers to carry, alone and without complaint, in a cabin at the end of a yard where nobody looked too closely. "I'm going to ask you something," I said, "and you can tell me to go to hell." She waited. "If you needed to go somewhere, had somewhere to go, could you get there?" Something crossed her face that I couldn't name. Not hope, not exactly. More like a door that had been bricked over for a long time and someone had just tapped on the bricks. "I don't know," she said. "That's fair," I said. "I'll leave you be." I walked out. I stood in the yard for a moment with the sun full on my face and the sky going slightly gold at the edges, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long while, not anger, though that was there too, something more like a direction. Like the current under a still river finding the channel it was always going to take. I want to tell this true, which means I have to tell the parts that don't reflect well on me. I spent the next 3 days turning it over and doing not much. I told her I wasn't going to do something hot-headed and I kept that, but I was also, honestly, afraid. Not of Edmund Pell. I've known harder men than him and I've been hit before and survived it. I was afraid of the consequences to her. I'd seen it happen. A man steps in. There's a confrontation. Maybe he wins, maybe he doesn't. And then the man who did the stepping goes back to his life. And the woman is still there in that cabin, with whatever comes after. There's a kind of help that looks like help and makes everything worse. I was determined not to be that. So I watched. I did my job, I thought. Edmund Pell, I'd gathered by now, was not a man who went looking for trouble outside his own household. He was a private kind of mean, the kind that only operates where there are no witnesses. He worked his days, drank his evenings, kept his mouth more or less shut in company. To Walt Coburn he was reliable, uncomplicated, cheap. Walt was not a cruel man, but he was a busy one, and busy men often don't see what they're not looking for. I needed to think about what I actually had the power to do. On the 4th day I rode into the town of Crossing, which was about 8 miles west, ostensibly to pick up a part Walt had ordered from the hardware. While I was there, I stopped at the stage office. The woman behind the counter had gray hair, and the organized manner of someone who'd been running schedules for decades. "Next stage east," I said. "What's the fare to Cheyenne?" She told me. I thought about it. "And from Cheyenne on to, say, somewhere in Nebraska. Kearney, let's say." She looked at a board on the wall and gave me the number. I thanked her and walked out. I stood on the boardwalk in the thin fall sun and did the arithmetic in my head against what was in my pocket, and then I went to the general store and did the errands Walt had sent me for, and I rode back to the spread thinking harder than I had in years. That evening I found Hitch Paulson alone in the tack shed, working on a piece of harness by lantern light. I closed the door behind me. Hitch looked up. He took one look at my face and set the harness down. "Tell me," he said. I told him, all of it. The sleeve at the cookhouse, the arm at the woodpile, the door, the marks above her wrist. I told it plainly and without ornament because that's the only way I know how to say hard things. Hitch was quiet for a long time after. He sat with his forearms on his knees and looked at the dirt floor. "Walt won't want to hear it," he said finally. "I know. He's going to say he can't lose a hand over something he can't prove." "I know that too." Hitch looked up. "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to give her a way out," I said. "I'm not planning to ask Walt's permission." Another long pause. Hitch was thinking it through the way he did everything, slow, thorough, practical. He picked up the harness again, and then set it down again. "If she leaves," he said, "Pell's going to know someone helped her. He's going to point at you." "Yes." "Walt might let you go." "Yes." "You've got 6 weeks of good work here." "I know." Hitch looked at me steadily. "You're going to do this anyway." "I am." He was quiet again. Then he reached into his vest pocket and held out some folded bills. "For the stage," he said. I looked at the money. I looked at Hitch. You don't have to do that, I said. I know I don't, he said. Take it. I took it. I folded it with what I already had and put it in my breast pocket, flat against my chest where it wouldn't work loose. You're a good man, Hitch, I said. He picked up the harness again. Go on, he said. Leave me out of whatever happens. I found Nora Pell on a Sunday morning the following week, when Edmund Pell was out on the property with two of the other hands doing a fence repair. A full day's job, Walt had said at breakfast, probably not back until late afternoon. I knocked at the cabin door. She opened it and looked at me and looked past me to check the yard, and then she stepped back and let me in. The cabin was spare. Clean, though. She kept it clean in the way of a woman who controls the things she can control. A small table, 2 chairs, a stove, a trunk, a shelf with 2 books on it, one window facing east. I took off my hat. I'm going to say something, and I'd like you to hear it all the way through before you answer, I said. She folded her hands in front of her. Waiting. There's a stage to Cheyenne on Tuesday morning, I said. From Crossing, 6:45. From Cheyenne there are connections east. I have the fare to Kearney, Nebraska, which is where I'd start if I were you, and a few dollars beyond that for the first days. I reached into my breast pocket and put the folded money on the table between us. That's yours regardless. You don't owe me anything for it, and I don't expect anything back. She looked at the money and didn't touch it. If you want to go, I said, I can arrange to have a horse at the north end of the woodlot Monday night, before he comes back. Saddle and gear, nothing that could be traced to Walt's stock. I'll see to it myself. You ride to Crossing in the night. Stable the horse at the livery and tell them Cal Briggs will be by to claim it, and you catch the stage in the morning. I stopped. She hadn't moved. Her hands were still folded. Her face was doing something complicated that I couldn't read. I need you to understand, I said, and here was the part I'd been working out for days, the part that mattered, that I'm not doing this because I think you can't manage. I'm doing it because what he's doing to you is wrong, and because someone should have made this possible a long time ago, and because I can. That's the whole of it. Silence. The wind moved outside. Somewhere the corral gate needed oiling. It gave a small cry with the pressure. And after, she said, her voice was carefully neutral. After nothing, I said. You go to Nebraska, you find your people, or you start over. That's your life to live. She looked at the money again. He'll know someone helped me, she said. Yes. He'll blame you. Probably. Walt might let you go. I almost smiled at that because it was exactly what Hitch had said, word for word. Probably, I said again. That doesn't bother you. It wasn't quite a question. No, I said. She stood there for a long moment. I watched her face move through something, not calculation, something deeper, like a woman who'd learned to expect so little that the presence of something straightforward and without conditions was itself a kind of shock, requiring adjustment. Then she reached out and picked up the money from the table. She held it in both hands, looking down at it. I have a sister in Kearney, she said. Good, I said. I haven't written her in almost 2 years. A pause. He didn't like letters. All right. She looked up at me. Direct. Those gray eyes with the particular quality I'd noticed the first day, measuring, careful, not afraid but experienced in what fear costs. Why? She said, not challenging. Genuine, like she truly needed to understand the mechanics of a person who would do this for no return. I thought about how to answer that. I thought about Helen, about how at the end it was 11 days and I couldn't stop any of it. How the helplessness of that had never entirely left me, the sense of sitting beside something wrong that was happening and not having the power to change it. Because I can, I said, and because it's right. She looked at me for another long moment. Then she said, Monday night. Monday night, I said. North end of the woodlot. I'll have the horse there by 10. She nodded, once, the kind of nod that's a decision fully made and finished. I put my hat on and went to the door. "Mr. Briggs," she said. I turned. She was standing in the middle of the cabin with the money held flat in both hands, and something had changed in her face. Not broken open, nothing as dramatic as that, but a slight yielding, like the particular relaxation of a muscle that's been clenched so long the person forgot it was clenched. "Thank you," she said, and this time it was not just a fact. "Yes, ma'am," I said. Monday was one of the long days. I worked the east pasture from before sunrise to past 4, and then I came in and ate, and told Garrett I was going to check the north fence line before dark, which was true enough. I rode out there and tied the horse I'd arranged, an old sorrel mare I'd bought off a man in crossing the week prior, nothing that could be connected to the Coburn stock, in the stand of cottonwoods at the edge of the woodlot. I left her on a long tether with water and enough grain to keep her patient. I checked the saddle twice. Then I rode back and went to bed in the bunkhouse and lay there in the dark and listened to Garrett and 2 of the other young hands talk about nothing in particular until they fell asleep. And then it was just me and the dark and the sound of the horses in the corral and the occasional far-off call of something I couldn't identify. At some point past midnight the sound shifted and I knew, without being able to see anything, that she was moving. I don't know how I knew. Maybe the horses registered something. Maybe it was just that I'd been listening for it so intently for hours that my body had its own awareness of the yard. But something changed in the quality of the night, some small motion in it, and I lay there with my eyes open on the dark ceiling and thought, go. I didn't sleep again until nearly morning. Edmund Pell came back in the late afternoon of Tuesday, as Walt had predicted. I was in the corral working a young quarter horse when I saw him walk across the yard toward his cabin. He'd been on the south fence all day, and he was tired and dirty, and I watched him go without moving a muscle. He came out of the cabin about 3 minutes later. I kept working the horse. He crossed the yard again, faster this time, and went to the cookhouse. Came out, went to the tack shed, came out of that. Started walking the yard with a particular purposeful anger that I recognized from a long distance. I got off the horse and tied her and went to the corral fence and leaned on it, arms folded on the top rail, watching him the way you watch whether that's coming your way. He saw me looking, he came over. "You seen my wife?" he said. "Not today," I said. His eyes on me had that quality I'd learned to watch for in men like him. The searching, the testing, looking for the crack in the surface. "She's not in the cabin." "Is that so?" "Her things are gone." He said it flat, like a threat wearing the clothes of an observation. I kept my face very still. "Couldn't say where she'd go," I said. "No. No." We stood looking at each other across the corral fence. He was deciding something. He was a man who'd learned to read people. You have to operate the way he operated without getting caught, and he was reading me now with everything he had. I was a man who'd spent 27 years being quiet and unreadable when he chose to be. "She had help," he said. "If she left," I said, "maybe she just left." His jaw moved. "Women don't just leave." "Some do," I said. He held my eyes another long moment. Then he turned and walked toward Walt Coburn's house. I stood at the fence and waited. Walt called me to his office that evening, which I'd expected. He was a square, gray-haired man of about 60, fair in his dealings and not given to drama. He sat behind his desk with his hands flat on top of it and looked at me with the expression of a man who's been handed a problem he didn't ask for. "Edmund Pell tells me you helped his wife run off," he said. "He says that," I said. "Did you?" I looked at Walt Coburn straight. "If she needed to go," I said, "she had the right to go." Walt was quiet for a moment. He was a careful man with words. "He works for me," he said. "Yes, sir." This is his household trouble, not mine and not yours. With respect, sir, I said, it stopped being just household trouble when he broke her arm. A long pause. Walt's hands pressed slightly flatter on the desk. You don't know that for certain, he said. I saw the marks, I said, old ones and new ones. That's not a fall, Walt. He was quiet a long time. Outside, the evening was going dark, the first stars coming up cold and sharp. I'd always liked the sky out here, more sky than anything, always, wherever you looked. He's a good worker, Walt said, but there was something different in his voice now. Flatter. I know he is, I said. And she's gone now. She is. He looked at the desk, then he looked at me. I'm going to have to let you go, Cal. I expected that, I said. I can't have men making decisions like this on my property. I understand. He rubbed the back of his neck. I'll pay you for the full 6 weeks. I hadn't expected that. Walt, I'll pay you for the full 6 weeks, he said again, firmer. You'll have it in the morning. I stood there. Something was happening in his face that wasn't the face of a man who thought he was right, more the face of a man who decided on a position for practical reasons and was not entirely comfortable with himself about it. Pell's going to be trouble without her here to direct it, I said. He'll find another place to put it. Walt looked at me. That's my problem now, he said. Yes, sir, I said. I know it is. I left his office and went to the bunkhouse and started packing my gear. Garrett watched me from his bunk. You're leaving, he said. In the morning. Because of the woman. I looked at him. He was 19, maybe 20. Good-natured kid, not much experience in the world. Some things are worth the cost, I said. He thought about that. Was she all right? She will be, I said. I want to stop here for a moment and say something true about those days between. Between the morning I rode out of the Coburn spread and what happened after. I didn't feel like a hero. I want to be clear about that. Heroes in stories ride off into the sunset with everything resolved and the feeling of having done something clean. What I felt, riding the road west from Coburn's toward crossing on a gray October morning with my gear on the pack horse and 6 weeks' pay in my pocket and no particular place to be, was tired. Not badly tired, not the grinding tired of a man who's done wrong, but the quiet tire of a man who's done what he needed to do and used up something real in the doing. I thought about Nora Pell on the stage to Cheyenne. I hoped the connection had run on time. I hoped the sister in Kearney was someone worth getting back to. I thought about Helen, which I didn't expect. I thought about how, when Helen was sick, there'd been nothing to do. The helplessness of that, of sitting beside something wrong and having no action available, no lever to pull, no thing to fix. And I thought about how this had been different. Not easy, not without cost, but there'd been a thing to do and I'd done it. That was something. I rode into Crossing and had breakfast at the hotel and sat there for a while over my second cup of coffee thinking about what next. The roundup was done for me. Winter was coming. I'd need work. The waitress refilled my cup. I thanked her. Out the window, the main street of Crossing went about its business. A freight wagon, a woman in a blue coat, 2 horses tied at the bank. Ordinary morning. The sky was the color of iron and the aspens along the creek had gone full yellow, bright against the gray. I paid for my breakfast and went outside and stood on the boardwalk in the cold air and figured out what I was doing next. I got work. That was never the hard part. I spent October and into November at a small spread called the Hendricks Place, about 20 miles south of Crossing, an older couple, their son, 300 head of cattle. They needed a man who could turn his hand to multiple things before the winter closed in, and I was that man. I fixed their root cellar, rehung 3 doors that had warped in the summer heat, helped them get the last of the herd sorted and bedded for winter. It was quiet work. The kind of days that are mostly silence and physical effort and the particular satisfaction of things that were broken being fixed. I didn't think about the Coburn place over much. I thought about Nora Pell sometimes, wondered if she'd gotten to Kearney, whether the sister had been glad to see her, whether she was sleeping without listening for a door. I hoped she was. November came, and the first snows came with it, and I was still at the Hendricks place when a letter found me. That's the odd thing, I hadn't told anyone where I'd gone. But Hitch Paulson had known, the way Hitch always seemed to know things without being told, and the envelope came addressed in a hand I didn't recognize, forwarded through Hitch with a note in his cramped writing that just said, "Thought you'd want this." I stood in the Hendricks barn and turned the envelope over. It was postmarked Kearney, Nebraska, October 28th. I sat down on a hay bale and opened it. Mr. Briggs, I am writing this from my sister's kitchen in Kearney. I arrived on October 14th. My sister was at the door before I reached it. I want to thank you properly, which I did not do as well as I should have when we last spoke. You gave me something I'd stopped believing was available, a way out that was real, that someone had gone to actual trouble to make real. I did not know how to receive that at the time. I am better at receiving it now. I have been here almost 2 weeks. I sleep well. That sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. I don't know what you lost because of what you did for me. I have thought about it. I imagine it was not nothing. I am sorry for whatever it cost you, and I am not sorry you did it. And I know that is a contradiction, but I think you are a man who can hold a contradiction without being troubled by it. I will not ask you for anything else, but I wanted you to know where I am, and that I am well, and that when I think of quiet men who see clearly and act without being asked, I will think of you. With real gratitude. Nora Pell. I read it twice. Then I sat there in the Hendricks barn with the letter in my hands, and the smell of hay and horses around me, and the November light coming in gray and cold through the gaps in the boards, and I held something in my chest that I hadn't held in a long time. Not joy exactly, not yet, but the shape of it, the place where something good has just been and left warmth behind. I folded the letter and put it in my breast pocket, same place I'd carried the money for her stage fare, flat against my chest. I wrote back. That surprised me too. I'm not a writing man particularly, but I wrote back. I told her I was at the Hendricks place and that I was well and that I was glad she was sleeping. I told her I didn't regret a thing I'd lost over it, which was true. I told her I thought her sister sounded like a good woman. I didn't know that for certain, but it seemed like the right thing to say. She wrote back. And then I wrote back to that. I don't want to make this into something romantic and quick, because it wasn't either of those things. Letters back and forth through a Wyoming winter, a woman finding her feet in Nebraska after years of walking on broken ground, a man learning to say more than the bare minimum after years of saying almost nothing. It was slow. It was careful. It was 2 people who'd both learned that most things promising go bad if you push them, and so neither of us pushed. She told me about the sister, Clara, and Clara's husband, a decent man named Ray who ran a dry goods. She told me about the job she'd found, helping a Kearney dressmaker 3 days a week. She told me about sleeping without listening. She told me, in one letter that took me a long time to put down, about what the marriage to Pell had been, the slow erosion of it, the particular cruelty of a man who operates below the level anyone else can see, how you stop trusting your own reading of things after long enough. I told her about Helen, about the 11 days, about the long, flat years after, about how I'd gotten used to going through the days without them mattering much, and how helping her, giving her a way out, had been the first time in a long time I'd done something that made the day matter. She was quiet a long time after that letter. Then she wrote, I think we are perhaps both people who needed to be reminded we are worth something to someone. I sat with that for a while. In the spring, April, The world going green and muddy after the winter. Nora Pell wrote and asked if I would come to Kearney. I read that letter maybe 4 times in one evening. I thought about what it meant and what it was asking and what I was capable of giving, and I was honest with myself about all of it in a way I might not have been 4 years earlier or a year earlier. Then I wrote back and said yes. I rode into Kearney on a morning in early May. The trees were in new leaf, and the streets were muddy from recent rain, and the air smelled like everything growing at once. I found the address she'd given me, a small house on a side street, Clara and Ray's place, with a neat garden at the front just beginning to come up. Nara was on the porch. She came down the steps and walked toward me. No hesitation. That surprised me, not in a bad way. Just, after all those careful letters, all that cautious back and forth, she walked toward me like she'd made up her mind some time ago and was just now getting to act on it. She'd cut her hair slightly, I noticed. The gray light of the overcast morning was good on her face. The measuring look was still there in her eyes. I think that probably never leaves a person, not entirely, but there was something else in it now. Something open. Something that had decided to be open. "You came," she said. "I said I would," I said. She smiled at that. It was a real smile, not performed, not careful, just pleased. "I did note that," she said. "A man who does what he says." I got off the horse. I stood there in front of her on a Nebraska street in May mud with my hat in my hand and the smell of new leaves in the air, and I said what I'd been working out how to say since somewhere around February. "I'd like to get to know you," I said. "Whatever that looks like, at whatever pace makes sense. I'm not a man who has many grand plans, but I'm steady and I work hard and I don't lie and—" I stopped. I was getting wordy. I almost never get wordy. "I think you know your own mind," I said, "and I'd like to be what you choose when you choose." She looked at me for a moment. Those gray eyes with their particular quality. Then she stepped forward and put both hands around one of mine, the hand holding the hat, and she held it. Firm and warm and plain. Not romantic novel, not grand. Just a woman who'd chosen something and was telling you so through her hands. "I've been choosing you since October," she said quietly. I stood in the Nebraska spring with her hands around mine, and the horse behind me and the mud under my boots, and I thought about all the roads that had run parallel, her road and mine. All the years we'd both spent being uncounted and unseen, and getting used to the shape of that. And how sometimes a thing as small as a sleeve and a tilted wrist, and a man who doesn't look away, is the beginning of everything different. "All right then," I said. She squeezed my hand once, and then let go and stepped back. "Clara's made biscuits," she said. "Come inside. I'll say one more thing and then I'll stop, because this is one of those stories that doesn't need a bow. There are men who do the right thing because they like being seen doing it. There are men who do it because it relieves something in their conscience. I'm not trying to make myself better than I am. I had my conscience in this, sure. But the truest reason, when I look at it clear, I saw something wrong and I had the power to change it, and so I did. That's the whole of it. What I didn't calculate, what I didn't see coming, because I'd gotten out of the habit of things coming toward me rather than away, was that a woman paying attention would notice the kind of man that makes, would carry it around inside her for months, would write letters about it in a winter kitchen in Kearney, Nebraska, and find in it the evidence she needed that some men can be trusted. I'd spent a long time being the man no one looked at twice, the careful man, the steady man, the man who did his work and was thanked and forgotten. I'd gotten so used to that I'd stopped expecting anything else. Nora Pell looked at me twice. She looked at me until she saw what was there, and then she picked it, freely, on her own terms, with clear eyes. If you're a man who's been a long time uncounted, let me tell you, that's the thing. Not being rescued, not some sudden reversal of fortune. Just a good woman who looks at you clear and decides, yes, that one. That's the one I choose. It's enough, it's more than enough, it's the whole thing. I went inside and had biscuits with Clara and Ray, and Nora sat across the table from me and poured the coffee with both hands, easy. And I watched that and didn't say a word, and the morning went on around us.